The question was brought forward from the Oregon Department of Agriculture about the use of sulfur dioxide to gas wine barrels. There are two uses for sulfur dioxide in the winery. One is used to put into the wine barrels when there's wine already present, and that's to prevent oxidation. That is not a pesticidal use. When the barrels are gassed, when it's used as a disinfectant, then that action in California is deemed pesticidal in nature. And when a product is a restricted use product, the winery would then have to have a pesticide applicator's license to purchase the sulfur dioxide for use in the barrel gassing, not in the treatment of the wine. Same product, different use. You could not use the Fruit Doctor label product to use it with the wine to oxidize the wine. You would have to have two separate products, basically. So it gets confusing, and there's confusion in California on that. The Department of Agriculture in California has an issue with the current Fruit Doctor label, and they're trying to get the EPA to make a determination, and that's in regards to the respiratory protection. So California has still not ironed out all their quirks with it. What the changes would mean for Oregon when it finally kicks into, let me back up a minute. So the Department of Agriculture is trying to work with the Fruit Doctor folks down in California to register their product in Oregon. That would be the simplest form, and they would basically pay a registration fee to register their product in the state, since they already have a label that's been approved by the EPA. What could then happen is the distributors of sulfur dioxide in Oregon could purchase that sulfur dioxide product from the Fruit Doctor and that label, and then they could sell it here. When the tricky part, I mean, it's confusing in that you have, if I'll just pick on Oxarc, for example. If Oxarc uses the term pesticide or disinfectant or says this will kill something, that's making a pesticidal claim. And then when you make a pesticidal claim, even though everybody is using it as a pesticide, but they're not calling it that, the issues can kind of be skirted. But when a dealer says this is a pesticide, makes pesticidal claims, then they can get in trouble for selling an unregistered pesticide. When you use an unregistered pesticide, it kind of falls through the cracks, and so that's what's currently happening. The differences that we would look at on a pesticide, if we get a pesticide label on sulfur dioxide, the things that would change from the Department of Ag side is the easiest. They would require that the purchaser of sulfur dioxide be a licensed pesticide applicator. So someone from the winery would have to have a pesticide applicator's license. The second thing, being it's a restricted use product, they would have to record the use. So you would have a log of how much you've used and when. You wouldn't have to post that, it's for record keeping purposes, so you would have to keep a log. And then the other aspect for the Department of Agriculture would fall outside of the winery itself, and that would be for the dealer. The dealer would have to have a dealer's license to sell you the registered use product, or restricted use product. So those are the three things that would kick in for the Department of Agriculture. They would also enforce the label requirements as far as rates, and they cite things that use inconsistent with the label. The department, or Oregon OSHA, we have a number of regulations that already kick in, and I'll go over those when it's my turn to talk about the health side. But the differences that would be, there would be more restrictive or more enhanced training requirements to follow on the label, because the current sulfur dioxide label is pretty bare bones. It doesn't include a whole lot. So there would be enhanced training requirements. There would be the requirement to post the area, if the area with the fumigation sign, barrels in the area are under fumigation, and then the respirator requirement would be different. Now, currently, on the Fruit Doctor label, this is the issue that the California Department of Agriculture has an issue with. Currently, down in California, they say if the barrel gassing area, if that area exceeds 2 parts per million of sulfur dioxide, the applicator will have to be in supplied air or in SCBA. So that's pretty extreme. So they're going kind of worst case scenario. Down in Medford, we had one of our compliance officers was doing compliance assistance with a winery, and he did some air monitoring for sulfur dioxide, and they was kind of in a sheltered area, and they were alarming at the IDLH level of 100 parts per million, and that activity would only take 15 minutes. And so when you average it out over 8 hours, it'll drop down, but still you're exceeding the permissible, the immediately dangerous to life or health label or limit. So you've got some things to work out on the monitoring aspect. The cartridges for sulfur dioxide are not the generic organic vapor cartridge. There are specific cartridges for that. But if you don't know what your initial concentration is, it's harder to say how long your cartridges are going to last. And so that's another issue that the EPA has to take into account when they're looking at the label. Because this is a little different. They haven't looked at this yet with great detail. They haven't looked at it as a pesticide and as this activity. It's kind of gone under their radar. So that's what's the up and coming kind of information on this. And so it's not, while we have a lot of work that's already been done by California and Washington as far as getting the information out to people, we need to all be on the same page as far as this goes. California, the other thing California has done, besides letting all their county ag commissioners know that they're looking at it and this is what they're enforcing, this is just the chapter, they've developed a microbial pest control study guide for the applicators to take the test, and this is just chapter 8 for barrel gassing. And so they worked with the wineries down in California to put this together. So this is available online. If the most extensive information out there is on Napa County Ag Commissioner's site. So if you do sulfur dioxide use in wineries and you look for Napa, the Napa Ag Commissioner's page, they've got links to the Fruit Doctor label. They've got links to the fact sheets from California Department of Pesticide Regulation, and they've got this study guide. And so it walks you through the California process. We are not enforcing that at this time, but you can gain additional information from those materials.
How do we stay legal?
Pardon me?
How do we stay legal?
How do you stay legal on sulfur dioxide?
I mean, the long and short of it.
The long and short of it is, currently we are not regulating it as a pesticide from going by the label. So what you are currently beholden to are the Oregon OSHA regulations for hazard communication, air contaminants, compressed gas, first aid and emergency response. Let's see, I have that. Let's see. I have to put my glasses on because I can't. We have currently, like I said, hazard communication, the health effects, emergency procedures, personal protective equipment, respiratory protection, the proper cartridges for sulfur dioxide, the elements of the respiratory protection program, and I'll go over all of those. Emergency eye wash, and then storage of the cylinders, making sure that they're stored properly. And that the MSDS will guide you on that. When you're dealing with it as a pesticide, all those elements will be part of the label. It will go over all those things specifically. So, and then let's see. The label, the fruit doctor label has some specific re-entry requirements for going into the area, making sure the levels are below 2 parts per million before any entry takes place. So there are a few to come up with, but those are the procedures already in place.
So you pretty much have to be monitoring SO2 concentrations if you're, before, during, and after.
Yes. Well, not really before,
You have to
because,
get a baseline.
well, if you haven't, if the area is well ventilated and you're not
Okay,
using it, then
like outside.
outside.
Garrett?
Yes.
If a winery is a winery and a vineyard together and a vineyard employee has a pesticide applicator's license, when the time comes, should the applicator's license come into effect? Can the vineyard employee's license apply, or?
I was looking over the Department of Agriculture's licensing requirements, and for the pesticide applicator's license, on their website, it had in bolded letters for an agricultural facility. And so I had sent them an email and asked about that, because there wasn't a clear, it's not a structural, it was confusing for them, so they don't really have it outlined. There's one for structural applications making, but this is still a little bit different. So it's not quite, it doesn't really have a neat place where it falls. It's not you're not applying, like, for example, if you had pests in this building and you went and did an application in this room, that would be different than doing the it's a little bit different. Same pesticide. I don't think it would be a structural license that you would need, but I'll get clarification on that.
Okay. And just to ask, the log, when people do track restricted use pesticides, they would have to separate out the barrel gassing use from other use?
From the winery, or the
They would
vineyard?
exclude the additions to wine in a log. Should they have to keep a?
That would be different, yes.
Okay.
And that's a USDA requirement to record for restricted use pesticides. And that would also be on the Department of Ag's website. They have USDA logs on there.
And you mentioned that there are more enhanced training requirements when something is registered as restricted use pesticide. Is it something where folks would attend like an OSHA training, or could Live offer training?
Live could offer that training. Basically, it would be making sure that they had followed a training protocol for it.
Okay.
Because of the inhalation hazards with it, and it's just going over. It's to kind of keep in perspective. The EPA and OSHA are different agencies, and when federal OSHA does not look at pesticides, only in the manufacturing setting. The actual use of pesticides, they said, oh, it's not us. Mm-hmm. So even though employees are exposed and employees are covered by Fed OSHA, they've kind of booted it over to the Environmental Protection Agency. And so the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't currently have hazard communication. So they had to make regulations to incorporate training because they don't talk to Fed OSHA. So in Oregon OSHA enforces pesticide requirements. We have a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Agriculture and the EPA, and so we do that here. And so the enhanced requirements it's a little bit more than just hazard communication, but hazard communication covers quite a bit.
Any other questions before we jump into the next subject? Go for it.
I was just thinking if The California registers the Fruit Doctor product, or things just proceed more in this direction, and folks here are not buying that product. Do you expect that other manufacturers will follow suit? Will people be like pressured to buy the Fruit Doctor product for pesticidal use if their manufacturer doesn't start registering it?
The EPA is going to have to make up their mind, because that would not, everybody would not, people would be, when you're working with the pesticide, the label is the law. So if you purchase the Fruit Doctor product, you're beholden to follow that label.
Yeah.
If you purchase an Oxarc or air gas product, you're not playing on the same field.
And I guess I'm just thinking of the scenario where it proceeds more to being regulated as a restricted use pesticide. Are the manufacturers likely to just keep step with that and develop a label reflecting that, or would the wineries need to?
I think it would go more toward everybody. We've got to have things being consistent.
Okay.
And so either they would have to purchase their sulfur dioxide and use it under the Fruit Doctor label, or they would have to go into the, I mean, it costs money to register products and to go through that process. And so then they would have to either follow suit or not sell it for that purpose.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So what our plan was is just to jump into this, like I said, just like a consultation or enforcement inspection. As we're going through it, if you have questions, just ask away. So when I do a consultation, or like I used to do inspections, one of the first things I looked at would be your safety committees. With safety committees, be sure to meet on a monthly basis. Do quarterly job site inspections where you do a walkthrough. All your safety committee members should be trained on hazard ID and accident investigation procedures. Those are two that right now I know enforcement is, they ask that question, have your employees, your safety committee members had this training? And it's something they cite quite often. It doesn't carry a penalty, but it is still a citation. So we have training online. It's about a 15-minute training maybe for both those subjects. You can do it yourself. All the training really is so your safety committee members know what to look for when they do their walkthrough. You know, what the hazards are that they should be looking for. Now on the accident investigation training, that's so that they know what to look at when they're reviewing an accident investigation report. You know, root cause analysis type training. You can do that yourselves. SAFE has good information. All workers' comp carriers pretty much have good accident investigation forms. And it's just so that the members know what they're doing when they're reviewing an accident investigation if one comes to the safety committee, which they should do if you do have accidents. Other things, keep your written minutes, post them for the current month, and then keep them for 3 years. If enforcement comes through, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your paperwork, make sure that you've been meeting every month, make sure you're doing your quarterlies and you have those records, because that's what they're relying on. They're looking that you've done it. Safety committee chairperson is supposed to be elected by the committee. A lot of times people get appointed to it, and if you have nobody that volunteers to be or wants to be the chairperson, eventually it can be an appointment, but you're supposed to have the election first. Try to do it that way. Any questions on safety committee before I jump into the next subject?
Could you talk about, I think when we talked, you mentioned under a certain size, the rule would be to have a safety meeting, but you might not need a formal committee.
Yep. So just a couple of years ago, our safety committee rules changed. It used to be just employers with 11 or more employees were required to have a safety committee. They changed it, and smaller employers don't have to have a safety committee, but they do have to have safety meetings. So if you're 10 or fewer, you can do safety meetings alone. With safety meetings, it's just a meeting once a month with all employees present. And you're talking about any safety issues they may have, and just keep records of that. And then
About the training.
none of the training applies, none of the other stuff applies. So if you're a small employer, or really it's just a safety briefing or safety meeting, 5-minute meeting, where you talk about any safety issues and keep records on it. So again, that's 10 or fewer. Yes?
For the training for the accident logs, is that something that you should have a record that says, you know, this employee, and this employee trained at this date? Is that something you guys are looking for?
Not required to have that. It's always good to document though, because a lot of employers just put it in their safety meeting minutes or safety committee minutes that these employees on this month were trained. You can track it anyway, but yeah, we don't require you to have that information. Again, what enforcement usually does, or what I used to do, is we'd interview employees and we'd interview safety committee members, and we'd ask them, hey, have you had training on hazard ID, you know, what to look for, and have you had the training on accident investigation procedures? So, and it's always good to document, because sometimes people forget that they had that training. Yeah. Okay.
And how do you define an accident? I mean, I know it's personal property, but how do you
Okay.
define
Yeah.
what that is?
What we require is that, what Oregon OSHA requires is if you have a lost time accident, so a person misses work, then you need to do an investigation. Yeah. A lot of them, and I recommend you do them for near misses. You know, whenever you hear about something where somebody almost got hurt, those are just as important. You know, you want to do it before somebody does get hurt, so, but you have to have them for the lost time. So again, if enforcement comes out, a lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to review your 801s, what you fill out for workers' comp, and with that, they're going to say, oh yeah, this person missed work, and then they're going to ask for the accident investigation along with it. Any other questions, safety committee? We'll jump into the next. Again, we've kind of talked about accident investigation procedures. Every location should have documented accident investigation procedures in case somebody does get hurt. You can find them off our website. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an email with all the stuff we're talking about and links to our resources. So if you do need to develop your safety committee or accident investigation procedures, you can pull that stuff off our website. Most of they're Word documents, so you can tailor them to your company. So, a 300 log is another thing related to accidents. So any employer that has 11 or more employees needs to have a 300 log. And that's just an accident notice log where you log in your entries throughout the year. And then you post a summary at the end of the year for 3 months. So, again, that is... basically looks like this. So I'll be sending a link if you don't have this.
And that's something you can post on like a shared drive where everyone has access?
If everybody has access, actually the summary, safety committee minutes, yeah, because that's what most employers do, where everybody has access. You can just put them on your safety committee minutes on there. You know, I'm not sure on the 300 log. Usually you need to post, I always see
Summary
it,
page.
you always see it posted.
And I kind of wonder about that because it's asking for a name and a little more detail, and so it kind of gets into that privacy.
Not the summary. The 300A, it doesn't have anybody, the only name it'll have is the top company executive's signature. And all you're seeing is, it's just totals, it's just numbers basically. This is how many injuries we had, how many lost time. It's really just data. So, but it should be posted.
Sorry to back up,
Uh-huh.
but if a winery has employees that actively work in the production area and then employees that are salespeople, how do you kind of look at whether the salespeople who may or may not be on site as much should be at the safety meetings and things like that?
If it's fewer than 10, you're going with the safety meeting option. They should be involved in it. It can be on the phone.
Okay.
You can
But if
teleconference.
it's like a remote person that maybe doesn't actually show up to the site very often, or maybe
Mhm.
never goes in the winery.
If it's the safety meeting side, he should be involved, because it's also his safety, out in the field.
Okay,
Number one place employees are killed on the job now is motor vehicle incidents,
okay.
so, it's talking to him about that too.
And if somebody's bigger, 11 or more,
Mm-hmm.
there could be like maybe one representative of that type of
Yes.
activity on the
Yep.
committee, and they
Yep.
would be able to sort of suss out all of those type of issues.
Yes,
Okay.
yep. So also, jumping to the next subject, safety and health posters should be somewhere on site. And usually, again, I'll send you a link. It's a link to Bully, and you can, I think it's $10 is what they charge for the big 8-in-1 poster. Whereas you go to a private company, a lot of times it's $75 or $100 for the same exact poster. So you might as well go to Bully and get it directly for them, or you can print them out yourself at no cost. Then you just have to post each one individually. So I'll be providing that link. Emergency procedures is the next subject. So each location should have emergency procedures. That jumps into a couple different things. One is an emergency medical plan. So what you're going to do if somebody gets hurt, you need to have those. They have to be documented. If you have 11 or more employees, you have to have it in writing. If it's fewer than that, it can be a verbal plan. But I always recommend if you're going to have a verbal plan, you might as well put it in writing. And then the next is dealing with fire, earthquake, basically those type of hazards, violence in the workplace. You should have something in writing there also. As for a fire, what you're going to do if there's a fire here. Everybody's going to evac. You're going to meet at a certain place, do a head count, make sure everybody got out. Those types of things. So you should have something like that in writing. Usually, what I see when I do my consults, just the one short paragraph. This is what we do. And then you just need to train your employees that if there is something that goes on, this is what we do. So pretty straightforward there. Do you want to jump into HAZCOM?
Sure. Hazard communication you probably heard that there's some changes going on. The material safety data sheets are going to be called safety data sheets, and they are all going to, it's a kind of there's some time that the manufacturers are going to be allowed to make them all consistent. So they will all no longer be everybody's doing it in a different way, and everybody's always complained, why don't they have a standard format? Now they're going to have a standard format, and they're going to change the name, and it's a global harmonization. So the intent is to have it all the same no matter what country you're in. There'll all be similarities there. Hazard communication includes the written hazard communication program, and it is the outline on how it works in your facility. We've got templates on our forms page on our website, and that is to guide you through the process. But I encourage people to make it more personal, make it more usable to your facility. But we're not judging you on the specifics. It's how it works for you. But it has to include the written program, the list of chemicals, so it can be divided up by laboratory, by in the press, or in the winery proper, on cleaning chemicals in those areas. So that a person working in an area can look at it and say, okay, these are the chemicals that I'm going to be exposed to. If they work everywhere, then they could be exposed to everything. If they're only working in one particular area, that's the chemicals they need to be trained on. The training portion of it includes things like, what are the hazards? What are the health hazards of these chemicals? What are the physical hazards? What are the reactivity hazards? If you mix two things together, are you going to get the formation of a deadly gas? That's an important feature that you need to have your employees trained on. What type of personal protective equipment is required and why? People are more likely to wear personal protective equipment if they know this particular chemical causes irreversible eye damage. Do you want to see what that looks like? This is what it will do to your eyes if you're not wearing these chemical splash goggles. That ensures that they have the knowledge behind why they need to wear it. Some people are more resistant to, you do it because I told you so. If they understand why, it's like, whoa, I don't want my eyes to look like that, so I'm going to be really fussy about wearing it. And then if I see somebody else not wearing them, they're more likely to say, hey, do you know what that will do to your eyes? So you get more compliance there. It includes the labeling of secondary containers. If you're going to mix a chemical and use it in a smaller container, if you use it all, if you have total possession of that chemical for that work shift, and you're going to use it up in that work shift, you don't need to put a label on it saying what it is. If you are going to have leftovers, you need to mark it with the name of the product and what the signal word was on the original product. A case in point was window installers, where this one window installer supervisor had a gallon container of methanol, and he didn't want to lug it up on the scaffolding. So he saw a water bottle on the ground, so he poured methanol in the water bottle and carried it up on the scaffolding. And it was part of their procedure that they had to clean off the window with the methanol to then caulk it, and that ensured the guarantee that the window wasn't going to leak. At the end of the day, he just dropped the water bottle and went and got in his truck and left. The individual whose water bottle it was picked it up, took it home. His procedure was, if there was water left over, his daughters left it in the truck. If there was the empties, they took it in the house and refilled them and put them back in the truck for their dad. The next morning on his way into the job, he had a headache. He popped a couple of Tylenol and took a swig of the almost empty bottle of methanol. The first swallow he got down. When he went to take the second swallow, his mouth was on fire. And so he called the job site and said, what is in that bottle? And then he called his wife and said, come and take me to the hospital. By the time she got to him, because he just had pulled over off to the side of the road, he couldn't see, and he was like totally out of it. And he had to be hospitalized in the intensive care unit, and he very nearly died. So what it does is it turns into formaldehyde in the body, and they had to keep him like legally drunk in order for it to process out. So that individual, the one who put it into that bottle, was just, he had such a hard time because he could have killed this guy, and he knew it. And it was just like, so he then would stand up at the safety meetings and say, and talk about how important it is not to put chemicals into food containers and then to label the container, because he almost killed him. So that's container labeling. But if you have complete charge of that container for that work shift and you're going to use it up in that work shift, you don't have to label. If not, you need to label it. And that's a really strong point on that one. For any type of pesticide container, make sure the label stays intact on the container. Watch your labels, make sure they're not becoming hard to read. If they're in a high moisture area and you find that that's a problem, when you get containers in, copy the label and laminate it, and then zip tie it to the handle. That's one way of doing it, to make sure if you have problems with labels falling off. The other thing is, like I said, on training, the training goes over physical and health hazards. It goes over emergency procedures. What do you do if you spill on the floor? What do you clean it up with? Who do you notify? Do you have the right materials to clean up that spill? You need to decide when a spill is too large to handle, and you need to call in a hazmat team. When is a spill too big? You need to make that determination. The emergency procedures, if you get a chemical splashed in your eye, you need to if it's going to cause irreversible eye damage, you need to flush your eyes for 15 minutes. And that's when having an emergency eye wash capable of supplying a 15-minute supply of eye flush is required. And so I brought fact sheets on the emergency eyewash and hazard communication, but I'll get it, so I have a fact sheet on that for you. The other thing is informing contractors. Informing contractors is even though it says the word contractors, it just means an outside employer. For example, if you had a pest control company come in to spray your interior facility, you would need to notify your employees that work in this area that you're going to have an application go on. One of the reasons that is so important, and we've had a lot of problems with notification, is and it's different from pesticide use in the field, because there you have the worker protection standard and notification in the pesticide logs. For inside of buildings, that comes through either hazard communication or health hazard control measures. You have to let the employees know. The reason being is people can be taking all kinds of different medications, and it's not your job to let your employer know, I'm taking this list of medications, because that's protected by HIPAA. But at the same time, pesticides can react with medications, so you need to let the employee know, so the employee with the knowledge of what they're taking can make that determination of, well, I might need to work in a different area, or I need to be away from that because I might have a reaction to it, or I need to see the MSDS, I need to consult with my doctor. If an employee walks into an area and they start to experience symptoms of pesticide exposure, then that kicks into what's called a PARC case, and that's the Pesticide Analytical and Response Center Board. So anytime there's an adverse pesticide effect to people, environment, or to animals, it gets booted up into the PARC board. So that's why notification takes place. You want people to have the option of not getting exposed and then not having symptoms related to that, because everybody reacts differently to chemicals. Some people, pesticides are not a big thing, it's okay. Other people, they're worried about it, and so that's why notification is important. You don't want people to get exposed. As well as if you had an electrical contractor come on board or come in to work in an area where for example, you're going to be doing barrel gassing, you want to inform them, no, you can't go into that area, we're gassing barrels. Wait until we let you know it's okay to go into that area. So you need to let the outside people know what areas they shouldn't enter because of a chemical exposure potential. So those are the notifying outside contractors. And if they're bringing chemicals onto your site, you need to know, they need to share that information with you as well. So it's a two-way street as far as chemical information.
Wineries have what's called an alternating proprietorship license set. Now, does that mean that whoever owns the facility has to tell the other alternating proprietor of what's going on? Do they both have to? Because legally, one's in charge of the area, according to the TTB at least. How does OSHA look at that?
So we look at who is the exposing person. So if, for example, you had and I'm not exactly sure what all you just said, but
Basically,
if I'm
you have
not-
multiple wineries using the same facility,
Yeah,
correct?
sure.
Is what you got.
Okay,
And they
So-
want to.
Except only one's in control at a time.
okay. So whoever is in control is responsible for sharing the information about the chemicals to which they're exposing others. If you have a facilities person that decides, oh, I see we need to spray inside, and they spray inside and don't tell you as the operator, so you can then inform your employees, we would look at it as how you are then dealing with your employees. Because if the facilities person doesn't have employees and they're not exposed, we would see what you do. So it's up to you to make communication to protect your employees. So you would have to find out from the facilities.
Mhm.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, and what our enforcement section uses actually is it's a multi-employer worksite policy, and it explains, again, you can find that if you want to make sure, it's right on our website. Just look at our multi-employer worksite policy. Yep.
So sharing of information is good.
Garrett, when you're notifying outside people coming in, do you want to have something specific to the situation that day at the winery? Could you provide a standard document that says these activities can possibly be going on in these areas and it'll be labeled? Or do you kind of do a specific notification each day that the person's there?
You can either do it by policy, but it's that exposure that day. So if, for example, you're having an electrician come in and you're doing, I'll just stick with barrel gassing because it's an easy example. You would say, you would touch bases with the electrician's boss if he's working for someone, and you would say, we're going to be doing barrel gassing. I'm not sure when the electrician's going to show up, but have him check with this person prior to when he arrives on site. And so we'll let him know then what areas he's not to enter.
Okay. But you might be able to create like a template and like check off the activities
Yes.
that they should look
Yeah,
for.
because then you can say, we did show him, and he took it upon himself.
He went
to go.
somewhere he wasn't supposed to go.
Right, so then you're removed from, you did your part. And so then we then go to the electrician's boss and say, okay, what's up with this guy?
Any questions on HAZCOM? Okay. The next subject, PPE, personal protective equipment, and it kind of ties into HAZCOM. So one of our requirements is that you have a PPE assessment, and that's where you as an employer have went through your facility and determined where PPE is needed, what tasks, and then you document that. Again, dealing with chemicals, sometimes you have to wear goggles, sometimes just safety glasses, gloves, it's what's required at your facility. And this is a kind of a specific for every employer in the state has to do this. And it's specific to you guys because you do something different here than a McDonald's, than a mill. Everybody has to do their own PPE assessment. And we have a good PPE tool here, and it gives some examples in it. And again, I'm going to be sending this electronically so you can use it if you haven't done that. It's a pretty common issue that enforcement runs into is that quite often people have the PPE and they have really done the assessment, but they just haven't documented it, just haven't put it in writing. So, that's it. And PPE goes, it's head protection, hand protection, foot protection, safety vests, all PPE. So, and that's covered in here.
Tim, do you know some of the common types of equipment that you see in the winery? Or would you be able to point them out as we go through?
Yeah, as we go through,
Okay.
yeah, that's what I was figuring out. I'd do as we do the walkthrough.
Real quick, are people okay with temperature? People hot?
Good.
Okay, because I can open more things. Just holler.
I'm sure all of you have forklifts, so everybody needs a forklift training program. You can do that in-house if you have your own trainer. To be a trainer, you just have to be knowledgeable in forklifts, what causes them to tip over, what the main safety components are. You don't have to send out your employees to a different company or anything like that. You can, but most employers that I run into have their own trainers and just do it that way. So with the forklift training, there's a documentation side of it, so keep that documented. And then every 3 years, you have to reassess. You don't have to retrain the employees, but you have to do an assessment of his skills. And a lot of times people just retrain every 3 years. And then if it's in ag operations, it's yearly. So if you have a vineyard that's kind of tied in and you have vineyard employees, I'd recommend just doing it on a yearly basis. That way it's covered. Ag rules, we have ag rules and we have general industry rules. In the winery, you're under general industry. Your vineyards actually fall under the ag rules, which makes it kind of tough for you guys. Yeah.
And one other thing to keep in mind about forklifts is if you're using propane powered forklifts is carbon monoxide. And so I brought a fact sheet on that so you can train your folks as far as what the hazards or what the symptoms are, what to look for, and then you can even put carbon monoxide alarms out. But maintaining your forklift so that you're not getting really high levels of CO being off-gassed up here, or the propane is combusting completely.
Lockout, tagout is the next subject. So with lockout, tagout, you don't have a ton, because most of your stuff's unpluggable. If it's unpluggable and you have control of that plug, lockout, tagout doesn't apply. But if something's hardwired, something you don't have control of the plug, then our lockout, tagout standard applies. And so basically, you know, throwing the breaker, putting your lock on it which is identifiable to you, be it a tag, it can have a picture of you on it. There's lots mills, that's what they do. They have a picture of everybody has their own locks and it has their picture, so they know exactly who it is. So it's whatever works for you. Probably just putting a tag with the locks would be the easiest for you guys. You need to have certified training, documented training for all authorized employees. And then also training for affected employees. Authorized employees are the employees that actually put on the lock and lock it out. Affected employees are just the people that work in the area. And they just need to know what lockout tagout is. Don't mess with that if it's locked out, basically. Real common issue I run into is multiple employees working on a piece of equipment with only one lock. And that's not allowed. So what you need to have is a multi-hasp. Each person that's actually exposed and working on that piece of equipment has to have their own lock on that hasp, so that somebody can't go back to after lunch and be working on it and they think they're done and somebody else is, you know, re-energizes it. So what else on lockout, tagout? Just an initial training. It's you're required to do a periodic review though and document that. And what the periodic review is you're just stepping somebody through the procedure. Hey, show me how you lock this out. So it's just one, you don't have to do it through everything. Just pick out one item, show me how you lock this out. You document that they did it correctly, and just do that once a year with all your authorized employees. So with lockout, tagout, if enforcement runs into an issue there, just so you know, it's always going to be a serious item. There's always going to be penalties related to it. Because when lockout, tagout fails, usually somebody's losing a limb, losing fingers, or getting killed. So it's something they really look at seriously, and it's, like I said, it's always going to carry a penalty if there's a problem with the program. Any questions on lockout? And almost done with programs. We got a couple. Do you want to cover confined space, or do you want me to?
You can start now.
Okay. Of course, our confined space rules changed. I don't know if you are all up on that 2 years ago, year and a half ago. When did they go in, the changes?
I think this last year.
Last year. So there are changes to the confined space rule. One change is you do need to identify all the confined spaces you have, not just the permit spaces, but every confined space. It can just be on a piece of paper. That's usually what most employers is. They do a list of their confined spaces. And then of course, is everybody familiar with what a confined space is? What meets the definition? So it's got to be large enough for somebody to enter, not designed for continuous human occupancy, and a limited means of entry. So any tank with a hole is, that meets the confined space. If you can walk into it through a door, it's not going to be a confined space. And then what makes it a permit space is that there's a hazard or potential hazard. And then it runs into, usually what in wineries, it's gonna be, dealing with atmosphere, you know. Whereas I just did a brewery and a lot of theirs is actually, they have mashers. So they have moving parts in their tanks. So it's a machine guarding issue there and an atmospheric hazard. So, do you want to cover the atmospheric side of it?
So for the atmospheric, you have to test prior to entry so that you know what the contaminants are. And so you can see if you can make it to where it's safe to enter, but you have to do air sampling to know what that is. You can't just say, well, if we rinse it out, it will be fine, because you need to know for sure. If we follow these steps, we've tested, this is effective this way. If you have, if you are going inside of a tank to create a hazard, for example, if you're going inside to weld, that creates a whole different situation, because you're welding on stainless steel, you're releasing all kinds of air contaminants. So atmospheric with wineries, carbon dioxide, if you're doing cleaning materials inside, you need to make sure that they are not going to react with the remaining product inside to create an additional hazard. So looking at the material safety data sheets or the data sheets to know what you're not supposed to mix the chemicals with is very important, so you don't create an additional hazard. I brought another fact sheet on confined spaces too that has the flow chart that walks you through the different steps.
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
And we're really flying through these things, so we got just 2 more programs to cover with you. And if you do want more in-depth, we brought consultation requests. So when a consultant comes out, usually, you know, it's more one-on-one. It's what your program is and what you've got, and they can look at your programs and review them completely, or discuss them, whatever you guys want, and tell you, yeah, you need to change this or not, or it's perfect. We just got, like I said, a couple more programs we'll go through, and then we'll take a break and then do the walk.
One thing that I out of my head was rescue. Rescue, you have to be able to extricate the person out of the confined space. If they go in and collapse in there, you have to be able to get them out. And you can't just rely on a fire department, because fire departments will not go into a confined space. Because if they haven't had the training and they don't have the equipment to go in, they can't charge in. And so that you cannot just make that assumption that they'll come. Besides, if someone's down in a confined space and by the time the fire department gets there, it's a body retrieval, because they will have not made it. So you need to be able to get them out. And so having them in a harness and I'm thinking.
And this is if you can't take it out of the permit.
Yes. That's if you
space
can't.
there. I mean, you know, if you can't through ventilation, and for all your spaces, you should be able to, through ventilation, declass or go through alternate entry procedures and not have to have a rescue team. You should be.
Yeah.
But I haven't been to your facilities, so I couldn't tell you for sure. So, again, that's something that a consultant could tell you after they do the walkthrough. They can go into more detail because it's specific to your location.
So if I get clarification there, what you're saying is if somebody identifies that there's no excessive CO2 in a tank and they go in there to clean it out, you've determined that in advance, you're saying you do not need a harness.
Correct. Don't need rescue because there is no hazard.
Okay.
If you're in into a tank where a gas could reoccur, or I don't know how, and I'm trying to think if there's MASH down there, and I don't know your locations. I know we had one enforcement officer went to a location and there was, they ventilated it, but then they went in and there was a bunch of the old grape husks in the bottom, and then when they were walking in that, it actually released gases. So, but again, I don't know what each of your locations
But
is.
if you
But
have-
if it's a clean tank and you don't need
But I
a
mean, if
rescue.
you have pumice in there and you have constant ventilation, then your level should be.
Constant ventilation.
Right.
Yep.
But you're also constantly monitoring, right?
If,
You have to monitor before you enter.
Yeah, but if you know that there is a possibility, then it's up to you to also keep the monitoring, right?
If you're doing something where that the activity in there can still be creating a hazard, yes.
yeah,
But once it's documented and you're sure,
yeah,
Right.
yep.
So does this all fall under permit required space, confined space entry, or where do you draw the line between non-permit and permit? Or is that location?
Okay, it's, when there's no hazard, there's no permit. Yeah, it all depends on, if there's a hazard and it's a permit space. And then you can go in under alternate entry because you've eliminated that hazard. But to begin with, it was a permit space, so you have to go through how you got rid of the hazard. Yep.
Are there any other successful examples of how people do have like a rescue procedure, other than harnesses? I don't know if there are
Really, the only way is, with a harness. Because to have a rescue team, it's not feasible for what you guys do. You could, but a rescue team would need to be there on site and suited up and ready to rescue.
And
You
in
very,
that
very
situation,
rarely
you need
use-
some way of knowing if that person was affected by the atmospheric contaminants. so
Right,
they'd have
because
to
you don't know
avoid
if they
them,
had
or-
a heart attack or if they,
well, everything's buddy system in confined space anyway.
mhm.
Okay.
In permit.
Right,
If you're doing
right,
a,
that's what
yeah,
we're
if you're
talking
doing a
about.
permit entry, you need to have an attendant.
Right.
There's a person in there, and how you're gonna rescue them, be it, hopefully, like I said, it's a harness. Otherwise, you need a whole rescue team, and they need to be trained. And like I said, in wineries, I don't see that happening. In mills, which I go through, yeah, they have to do that sometimes, depending on what they're doing. But, yeah. And then usually what they do is they hire an outside contractor as their rescue team for that one job task that they're doing.
Mhm.
So. And there's a stay on that for enforcement, right, on the new confined space rules until September. And I'll be sending all that out to you and then you can forward it. One major change I know is the old confined space rules didn't require you to have a list of all your confined spaces, and that's one thing that does. And then I'll send that.
If you noted it on, say, like a grounds plan, if for
Mhm.
some reason it was a
That's,
confined space, you
yep,
didn't note
I've
it.
seen it that way, yep, and that's acceptable. Yeah.
So, for us, with the closed top tanks, we had the consultation a couple years ago. We don't ferment any red wine in the closed top tanks, only white wine.
Mhm.
The white wine is, after it's done fermenting, it's racked off, it's rinsed out prior to getting in the tank, so it's really,
Mhm.
does that even need to be considered on a list for a potential confined space?
Yes, it is a confined space, but it might not be a permit confined space, so you don't.
That's the new rule.
So, yeah.
He said, basically, we have no confined space.
Yeah,
In our winery?
he meant you had no permit confined spaces, yeah.
Okay.
No
So
hazardous confined
Just
spaces.
have a list of all of our closed
Yeah.
top tanks, and
Yep.
that's.
Anything that an employee can enter like that is a confined space. Again, what's really hazardous is if it's a permit space. And every confined space could be a permit space if somebody goes in there, like she said, and does some welding or something like that, because then you're creating a hazardous atmosphere and it's a permit
Do we need
space.
signage on those tanks?
Nope.
Just a list? on
Just
it?
a list. Yeah.
Is the list a listing of the, say, would an item be tanks, or would you list the number of tanks that you have?
You'd list the tanks you have. Usually the way,
Okay.
what I've seen drawings, schematics of but you might move yours around, so
Yeah.
it works for you, that identifies the tanks, or the confined spaces. It's not just tanks.
And is it still anything that you can put your head into? I mean,
It says bodily enter.
I've seen people call confined space, subterranean vaults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be bodily be able to go into them. Yeah, because I've had that question come up, is if you can't go down into it, physically fit yourself into it, then it's not a confined space.
But like
And that's
the,
in the new confined space. It's a good definition in there on the new confined space rules.
like water vaults, those type of vaults,
Mhm.
yes, those are confined spaces.
Bigger ones, though, where
Yeah,
you
you
can
can
go
get
in.
in.
Utility vault.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I work
We've
for
had
the power
fatalities.
company
Yeah,
and we've
you
had,
can fall and, fit in them.
yeah. The utility vaults that I ran into when I was at the power company, we had a fatality and it was because of plant growth, sucked the oxygen out of it and it was lack of oxygen. So, I mean, yeah. Confined space, covered that. The only other two are respiratory and hearing. Probably the only hearing issues is dealing with bottling lines. So I'll let you cover it.
Okay.
Noise.
We have, to make your assessment on what areas you may need hearing protection or a hearing conservation program in place, is you do your initial noise monitoring. And so you want to have it at full capacity or, let's see, real world case. So you don't want to do, you want to do it when it's in operation. And so you can get your actual values. And so if you are above 85 decibels for an 8-hour time-weighted average, that kicks in the hearing conservation program. So for example, if you had somebody working on a bottling line 8 hours a day and they were over 85 decibels, well, we would have to have you at 87 decibels because we have a 2 decibel level that we will cite above. So 87 or above, you need a hearing conservation program. And what that means is a person has to be have their hearing tested annually within 6 months of them working there. So being a seasonal basis, that's kind of problematic. You might not end up having to test them. But if when they come back and they've been working on that bottling line and they said, hey, I have hearing loss and it's because I worked here and I was overexposed here, you could be liable for that. So if when someone comes on for that season and you test them and they're still okay, then you know liability wise you're outside of that range. They can't go back and get you.
And one of the easy checks on this is to have one of our consultants in, have one of your workers' comp consultants in with a dosimeter, and they can just do the test for you. And once you've got that document, the baseline, you know what their exposures are.
Right, and then the other thing you can do is administrative controls. You can have them work in a different area so they won't reach that level, and so then you don't have to do that.
Yeah, if you know it's that your bottling line's 95 decibels, well then you're only going to have employees work there for 2 to 3, however many hours, and then you'll shift them out and move other people in, and then you're not overexposed on the 85 decibels for 8-hour period.
Do you guys accept like industry standards? So if everybody in here got together and we monitored it once and it was 80 dBA, would that be cool? And like, could everybody use it, or does it always have to be that specific bottling line?
It's got to be that line. It's got to be that location. Because, I mean, a bottling line in a small room versus a large room, I mean, it really can affect the noise. So it's got to be at that location, yeah.
So I know a lot of us use mobile signature bottling. Does that fall under our responsibility or theirs? Is our employees working?
Your employees are working?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What about
And
check-
they have
It's
signs
again, right there, we look at it as a multi-employer work site. So, you know, if enforcement comes out, they're going to be inspecting both companies.
It's their-
And, you know, if there's an issue, it'll be dealing with both, because they're the exposing, because it's their equipment, but it's your employees as well, so.
So for the mobile bottling truck, if the setup is the same wherever they go and they've done a test and you check that they've done it, is that adequate for determining the likely noise level? Or do you have to have them tested before?
So I haven't seen that, so I don't have the image in my head,
Does
but,
somebody use them?
There's an 18-wheel truck that
Okay.
cruises around, goes from winery to winery. All he does is bottle.
And
Okay.
it's in his truck, does it stay in his truck?
Yeah.
Yes.
then once he's monitored, he knows, yeah, it's not gonna change there, so, yeah.
So if he's at
If it's inside a building
95,
versus outside, it could be.
But all that noise is confined into that truck. I mean, there's not a lot escaping, so, yeah. Whatever, I'm sure he's got the data, I would think.
Yeah, I would think.
But your employees are going in there and doing the work, so I would look at that data just to make sure. Yeah. Because if it is 90 or 95, you're probably gonna wanna do it, your work shifts differently.
Sure.
Because then you don't have to jump into having the whole program with the, testing and all that.
What about temporary employees? I mean, a lot of us use temporary employees for that, so where does that liability fall? Same thing?
Yep. The only thing we look at as far as temp agencies, their responsibilities is some generic general training, and that's dealing with HAZCOM, a couple others, PPE, and one or two other subjects, and they just have to give a general training. Because the temp employer, they're sending employees to all different types of industries, so they really can't give a good training. It's got to be on site. Yeah.
Do you guys have any idea in terms of what a bottling line produces on average for noise, as to whether or not earplugs are adequate, or whether or not you're talking about hearing protection?
I don't, because I'm a safety, but I don't know if you've done.
I haven't seen that setup, so I don't have a
I have
basis.
been out with, I take that back, I have been out with a health consultant, and they've done some monitoring, and it wasn't a mobile operation, it was just their bottling line, and it was over 90.
It was over 90.
Yeah. But again, one bottling line to the next, I mean, it can be completely different. That's why it's always good if you got your own bottling line, just to have one of us out as consultants, and we just give you the data and do with it as as a consultant. I'm a state-funded consultant, so when I come out, I point these things out, give you the report, leave, and that's it. You can do with them what you want. You don't have to fix anything but imminent danger situations when we're out there. It's the only thing we require. We're just a resource to try to help you be in compliance. So if me 10 years ago that came out, enforcement loves it when consultation's been there, because they don't want to cite employers. They want to go in, see everything's great, in compliance inspection, and leave. But
And what was the distinction between the earplugs and hearing protection?
Hearing protection is earplugs.
It's
You can have, there's different types. You have a wide variety of earplugs that go into the ear, and then you have ear muffs that go over the top of the ear. Sometimes if it's really noisy, you have to wear, the earplugs and the ear muffs. There's quite the spectrum of different types. When you have a hearing conservation program, because of the noise levels, you have to offer two different types, because not everybody's ears are the same shape. And so one pair might be too big and cause pain, and so the people are not likely to wear them. And so you need to, when you have a hearing conservation program, you have to train people on hearing, how the ear works, and you have to be trained on how to use the hearing protection so that you're properly inserting it.
And there's some variation with the plugs as to how.
Yes.
and how much noise? Yeah, how much
It's called the NRR rating, the noise reduction rating.
Yep.
Do you guys have a recommended rating?
It
depends
depends
on-
on what your noise levels
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
Completely on noise levels.
And
Does that
it's on
pretty
the
easily tie into the decibels? Like, could somebody look at the package and know what would be appropriate?
They'd have to look at the rule, and it might also be on the fact sheet, because you have to be able to reduce at a certain level, because decibels are exponential. It's not just straight across the board. Because it might go up 2 dB, and that's a really big
But if,
jump.
for instance, we heard some anecdotal averages, we might be able to help people
Yes.
calculate what
Mhm.
NRR they
Yes.
should be looking for. Okay.
Yes. Okay, and respiratory protection.
Yep, last one.
I have a fact sheet on that too. If you have air contaminants and you have your employees wearing respiratory protection because the air contaminants exceed the permissible exposure limits, or you as the employer require the employee to wear respiratory protection, a written respiratory protection program is required. We have publications that will guide you through the process of developing a written respirator program. And what that does is it's pretty much a fill-in-the-blank kind of program for the most part. I mean, the program itself doesn't change much. But where you're wearing the respirators, that does. So you have to do an assessment on when it's required and when it is required, or you have mandated it to be required. The individual wearing the respirator needs to have a medical evaluation, and that's cited as a serious violation when we come out if a person is wearing a respirator and has not been medically evaluated. What the medical evaluation is, it's a questionnaire that the employee is filling out. It's submitted to a healthcare provider. They evaluate it to make sure that employee doesn't have, have any health conditions that would make it dangerous to wear a respirator. Because wearing a respirator puts stress on the body. And if a person has an underlying condition, puts on a respirator, goes into an air contaminant, and has a problem, and they start to freak out. For example, they have claustrophobia, they go to yank off the respirator, they're overexposed, and that would be bad. So, or if they have a heart problem or a respiratory problem, and they can't get enough air, that's a bad situation. So that's a requirement. The medical evaluation is required. It's a one-time deal. Unless the person has some type of medical condition in the meantime, then they may need to be reevaluated. The other thing is fit testing. You need to make sure that the respirator fits that employee correctly. It's required for each type of respirator that they're using. So if they're using a half-face cartridge respirator or a full-face respirator, they need to be fit tested twice for each mask, or once for each mask. Then it's an annual test, so it has to be done on an annual basis. Medical evaluation, one-time deal, fit testing is on an annual basis. Then they need to be trained to make sure that they know how to properly put on their respirator, how they properly take it off, when to change the cartridges, how to clean it, how to properly store it, and what the limitations of the respirator are. So I brought it's the ag version, they're pretty similar. And I printed it all off and I have it in dividers, so I have the medical evaluation section separated, the fit testing, training, inspections. You want to, as part of your safety committee, hang on a second. You can do spot checks on how the respirators are being stored and see if people have a problem with that or they're doing it incorrectly. If you're noting that on the safety committee, every year you'd have to do a program evaluation. What the program evaluation is it's really simple. There's a form in the back. You talk to everybody that's wearing the respirators and you find out if they have any issues. If they have an issue, then you need to note on your evaluation how that was taken care of. If, for example, you have a problem with storage, you can note that in your program evaluation and how it was corrected. You updated trainings, that type of thing. The program evaluation is to help you make it usable for you. Identify any weak points and take care of those there. So again, the highlight with that one to watch out for is the medical evaluation. So if you have employees wearing respirators, you need to make sure they have their medical evaluation prior to them wearing the respirator. I mentioned before the emergency eye wash for the chemicals that you're using. The point to keep in mind on the labels, if it says corrosive or danger, causes irreversible eye damage, that's your signal word that the chemicals will need a 15-minute plumbed eye wash. The other issues, so if the pH is less than 2.5 or greater than 11.0, that requires an emergency eye wash.
And how close is it?
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
And they can't go through a door unless they're working with another person, so the other person could take them.
Do you relate that to the feet in the real world?
Does it matter?
It says,
Does it?
it just says 10 seconds.
Yeah.
We timed an employer one time because he said it was close enough. And I said, okay, go over there where you're mixing, this was at a farm, where he was mixing his pesticides, and so we were timing him, and he sort of sauntered over there, and I said, no, it's over. And he goes, well, I can do it faster. And then I told him he needed to scream because his eyes were burning, and so, but he was able to get over there, but, so it's just, but that's the 10-second rule.
Are there any like carts?
Yes,
that you see?
yes,
Okay.
you can have a portable unit. What one dairy did was they had a dolly, and they put a plastic barrel on the dolly, and they put a portable eye wash on that, so they could move it to wherever they were working with the chemicals, and then they could take it back and store it, so it wasn't left outside.
But then you need to make sure there's enough
Yes.
wash in there.
You have to maintain it according to the manufacturer's specifications, and that's all on the fact sheet. Any?
Oh, one thing I forgot to cover, first aid trained personnel. Because of where you're located, most of you do need to have first aid trained personnel out on site. If you're within 4 minutes of ambulance, paramedic services, fire department, then you can rely on that. But if you're not, you should have or need to have first aid trained personnel out on site. With that, it's up to you, but you don't have to, it should be Good Samaritan, meaning it's up to the employees still to choose to perform or not. Because if you are requiring it, that they perform, it jumps you into some other
The bloodborne pathogen requirement, hepatitis shots, and training on that.
So you have to have the trained personnel, but again, they don't have to perform.
You haven't made it part of their job duties.
So, and that's it
I think
on the
that's it.
programs.
Are there any things that would be good to touch on for specifics of chemical storage before we do?
The chemical storage, afterwards I thought, on the material safety data sheet or the safety data sheet, that is your key to how you need to store your chemicals. It will give you specific guidelines. Do not store with this, do not store with that. So that's, when you're doing your employee training, those are the areas. I work on the pesticide side. On one of the trainings, I passed out MSDSs to the class, and then I said, okay, what does this react with? And they had to go through the MSDS and find it, and then the first person to find it shouted it out. That's one of the good things to do with safety committee training or on hazard communication training. Get people familiar with what the information is contained in there, so they can access it quickly. You don't have to have them memorize the whole entire thing, but they have to know what is on there so that how it can help them. And it's good to go over it ahead of time so that they are not going through a big binder trying to find out, okay, this is on the spill and it's now, off gassing and turning, all kinds of colors, and that's not the best time to go searching for things. So you want to use the MSDS for storage to make sure that you're not having incompatibles together.
And have you guys seen examples of anybody doing color coding for like categories or something to alert someone
You
who's
can.
further away?
You can color code acids or caustics. You can you can train that way. You can train, okay, if you have something with a red label stuck on it or a zip tied on, those are acids, and these are the caustics, and don't mix them together. And is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, I've seen some people do have like a specific color to alert people who are maybe further away and aren't maybe.
Right, if they're not working with the chemicals, and they're generally kind of in the area, do you mean those? if there's people that don't work with the chemicals, they're not pouring and mixing, they only need to know, they don't need to have all the detailed information on the MSDS. But they need to know, okay, if they look in that room and they see a chemical spilled over and a person on the floor, what do? They don't go rushing in there because they could die as well, or pass out, or become unconscious. So they have more kind of an awareness level.
And one thing with chemicals, the December of this year, I don't know if you said it was the date, is when the new training requirements kick in for all employees. All employees need to be trained on the new global harmonization system and the new pictograms that go along with it. So like all your secondary containers, it used to be you could just put a name on it. Now you're gonna have
The pictograms.
the pictograms as well.
So
You know, acid burning a hand, a flame for flammables, and that kicks in again December of this year.
The problem with that is that the chemical companies have a longer time to get those labels on. So by the time
On
they,
their original containers.
on the original containers. So by the time you start receiving new stock, it might be, a year later, and so you'll have to keep up on the training.
So
They might
do
forget
you have
by the
to
time.
put a new,
Not
No,
on
no.
the original container.
No, not
but
on the
I'm
original.
saying this would be secondary containers. You just need to.
You don't have to relabel the original containers. It's kind of like with the pesticide thing. You go with the label on the container that you purchased. Kind of the label is the law, so to speak. You don't have to relabel everything.
did you guys say you had a training or something for people on the harmonization?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I'll provide a link. We've got our workbook that's been updated to include that, but then I'll provide links when I send that to you, and it's online training, or you can do it using the paper.
For the medical evaluations, is there any reason that if someone had one done in the state of California and then came up here that they need another one done in the state, or it's all the same?
They would have to come with their okay.
Okay.
Because with the medical evaluation, when you send it into a healthcare provider, they send you back a form that says you're okay to wear a respirator.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to keep, that's in the binder that I have, that's where I would put that employee's okay to wear. So that you would know you've got your list of people that are gonna wear a respirator, and you've got, all their records in one place. And so if they bring it up with them, you've made sure that they have that. It's your responsibility to ensure that they
Regardless of where it came from?
yes.
If they have, okay.
Because some people will say, oh, I was, or like fit testing, well, I was fit tested in the military. And it's like, well, that has to be done annually, so that doesn't,
But that doesn't work for forklift training.
oh,
Because you see that all the time. Well, I've got a card. Well, you need to make sure that the person that they still know how to operate. You can't rely on somebody else's training there.
yeah, that's kind of with the pesticides and the handler training. If they had a handler card, we wouldn't accept that, because in Oregon, we have hazard communication, and you need to make sure that person has got those things.
Do you guys see examples of people working with Salute or any other organizations on sort of the medical paperwork
Yes.
side?
Yes, that's one of the facilities that can go through your medical questionnaires and do the okay, because they've worked a lot with wineries, and so they know, they're familiar with use practices.
Any other questions before we do the walk?
Can the lockout tagout program be a part of the confined spaces program? For example, like
A lot-
wine presses and
A
whatnot?
lot of times it does tie together, yes. Yeah, it'll be a separate program, and then in the confined space, you'll say use lockout tagout to change it from a permit space to a non-permit, yeah. So during the walkthrough, I follow the employer around and cover whatever locations they want us to cover, and it sounds like we're going to do the whole place here. When enforcement comes out, they're going to go open up pretty much every door if you got a real thorough inspector. So during the walkthrough, there aren't going to be a lot of items we see here that are wrong, but I'll be pointing out things that I've seen at other locations. We're not going to need to walk through the upstairs here. I'll just kind of cover with you what enforcement looks for and what they see. Our rules mirror the fire marshal rules, so piggybacking surge protectors, common citation item violation. Extension cords used for permanent wiring, that's an installation of 90 days or more. See that quite often. The other things are exit signs, making sure that those are all posted, and then fire extinguishers, that they're available and been inspected. There's an annual inspection, which you hire out. Company comes and checks it, weighs it, does all that. And then there's a monthly that's missed all the time. So once a month, all extinguishers are supposed to be checked by somebody at the facility. You can log it on the back of it. It has usually there's a tag, there should be a tag. And on the back it has a place to log those monthlies. So, and all you're doing on a monthly is seeing that the pin's in it and the keeper's on it, nothing's been jammed in the nozzle, and it's showing in the green, and it's there, and check. And you can either log it on the tag, or what some employers do is they make a master list and just keep track on that list. So, anything else, Garnet, in office settings that you can think of, or not in production? No. So that's pretty much it in, out in just these common areas out here. So we can follow. Guardrails. So guardrails are required anytime you're on a platform 4 feet or greater. It needs to have a standard rail. Quite often we see chain or wire rope used, and it's going to sag too much. So with 200 pounds of force, if it can be deflected below 39 inches, that top rail, then your guardrail is going to be out of compliance. I've seen quite often where you put on a wire rope or chain and it'll sag all the way down to your knee when you put 200 pounds of force. And really that just creates a false sense of security, and you go to catch yourself and it pushes down and you go over the top. So with the railing, it's a top rail again at 42 plus or minus 3, and then a mid rail half the distance, or you can do multiple like this. And then toe boards are required when employees are possibly working below, or you got a walking area below. And it's a 4-inch toe board is what's required there.
Is that for in case you kick something off of the
Yep.
platform? Okay.
Yep. Tools, equipment, so it doesn't get kicked off. I'll jump into cranes. With cranes, if you have any hoisting device, make sure they're inspected with it on that annual basis. Chain slings, wire rope slings, webbing, all need to have tags, meaning with their capacities, what they can lift, so you don't have something fail on you. Okay. Other stuff up here. Let's see, one right here. It's not going to be it's not a violation because of where it's at, but a common thing we see is belts and pulleys, chains and sprockets, rotating shafts that are unguarded. This one's guarded by location. Anything above 7 feet is considered to be guarded by location, or if it's behind a guardrail where you can't reach it. But if it is behind a guardrail and people go back there for cleaning purposes and all that, lockout, tagout would have to be applied before you go back there. Otherwise, just make sure you guard it. Again, belts, pulleys, shaft ends. Shaft ends can extend half their diameter if it's a smooth shaft. So say it can extend like a 1-inch shaft, it can only extend a half of an inch. If it's got a keyway or anything like that, it's got to be cut off flush or guarded. Tanks, as far as identifying them, and all you have to do is size, how many you've got, and just document that on your chart. You have 30 tanks of this size, that move about, and that's good enough for identifying. So you're a little different than, again, like most employers. Most employers confined spaces don't move, but a lot of yours do. So as far as one issue I've ran into several times is how often do you have to get up on your barrels to check? Do you know?
We talk every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks? Okay. And so when you're getting on top of barrels like that, our fall protection rule is it's 10 feet or greater. So if you're getting up, say where you're 4 high there, you'd be in violation of our standard as far as fall protection. And that's, again, if you're getting up onto them. If you're on a ladder, you know, you're fine. But I ran into quite a few locations where they climb them to get up on top. And if it's 3 high, you're in compliance with our rules because it's less than 10 feet. But if it's 4 or more, you need to figure something out as far as fall protection goes. So.
Any suggestions about that?
Ladder. There are, I don't know if you've seen the narrow ladders designed for, they're the, you know, the aluminum ones, the rolling ones. There's several out there. And that's what I've sent to some employers is this is an option. So it all depends on your location, you know, and how you're set up. I've seen some locations down in California, I saw information on those, and they tie off. They have a track system where they hook onto a lanyard and they can walk on the barrels, and if they fall, it's going to catch them.
So as far as during the fermentation process, monitoring the carbon dioxide levels, you know, to have a procedure in place to know when it's okay to go into a specific area. Or, you know, does ventilation kick on prior to entry, or some type of procedure like that?
And you're all alarmed, right, here?
Yeah, we have CO2 sensors in
Okay.
these 2 rooms in our other main fermentation, all ventilated
Okay.
around the clock during harvest.
Good.
Oh, that's pallet jack. Okay. So you have that and you have forklifts though, right?
Yeah, we want to.
Okay. When we get to the forklifts, I'll jump into what's looked at on those. Okay.
Is there any training needed for something like that?
Any tool you should be trained on. So it can just be a hands-on, whatever. But with forklifts, we have specific, you know, training items that you have to cover. But with any tool, like a chainsaw, you know, you need to be trained on. We don't say cover this, this, and this, but you should have training. Don't drop start on. Do you have a chainsaw? Probably just in your, not in here, but out in your vineyards.
I'm sure they have all that stuff.
And we may be doing something with the vineyards in a couple months. Is what you're thinking?
We talked about maybe doing something prior to harvest as a refresher reminder.
Yeah. Because there's quite a few completely different hazards and a completely different rule book that applies to that out there. So, all right. Next area. Have the outside, well, sometimes not even this, but it'll be missing this guard on the backside. So if you have any kind of machinery where you're guarding it, make sure the backside's protected as well. People put their hand down and lose fingers. Oh, this one, yep. Like on this one. So on this one, where you have the pinch point right there. So I don't know, it looks like it may have had something at one time. I don't know if it did or not. That would just come down further like that. Cover that up. Yeah. So what we have is just a chain and sprocket where there's exposure. If I make sure it's not plugged in, yep. Put my hand here, wrap my fingers around it, and it is rotating. You know, just take the fingers right off. So just need to add a little bit of guarding to protect from that hazard. Let's see what else. Okay. Okay. This is considered a ship's ladder, ship stair. They're acceptable in areas where you can't get a regular stair, so they would be acceptable here. The main thing with these is that they're used properly. These are designed to go up, but also come down backwards. I see it all the time. Well, Navy guys where well, actually they'd ride down the rails. But you're supposed to go up them, and again, come down backwards, just like you would a ladder. So that's really about the only thing on these. Handrails on any stairs that you have that have more than 4 risers is when the handrail requirement kicks in, and then the handrail has to be on all exposed sides. And as far as heights, it's a little bit different. If you are going to be building any, look them up in our code. It's 36 inches. It's not 42 like a handrail. Stair rail is 36. So it ties in a little bit different. Ladder use. There should be training for all employees on ladders. It's just, the basic training, what everybody should know. It's the number one place employees fall from elevation is off of ladders. And that's because everybody uses them. There's a lot more exposure there. So always, open up a step ladder, never use it, lean it up because the feet don't move. Don't use the top 2 steps of a step ladder to stand on. If you're using extension ladders, correct angle is important, 3 to 1. And then also, whenever you're using a ladder like that, and if you're getting off it, it needs to extend 3 feet above the level you're accessing. That's so you have something to grab a hold of when you're getting on and off it. And then tying off ladders whenever there's a possibility of displacement. So if you're putting a ladder out somewhere where there's forklift track or even where people are walking in and out doors, you're supposed to tie it off or secure it some way to prevent displacement. And any questions on ladders? If they're fiberglass or any kind of ladder, they should be inspected before each use. And what you're looking at there is to make sure that they're not damaged. Fiberglass, especially if they're out in the weather or out in the sun, they break down real fast because of UV. Fast as in several years they'll break down. So you look for cracks on them. If they're starting to crack, get any kind of crack on it, you need to get rid of it and get a new one. Okay, where to now? A lot of, they do employee interviews as part of their requirements that they do that. And they're going to be asking lots of questions. One of the real common ones in facilities like this, they'll say, how often do you get up on top of the tanks? Not do you get up there. They'll say, how often do you get up there? Kind of a leading question. Employees, quite often at other facilities I've been to, get on top of the tanks. And again, if it's greater than that 10 foot, some type of fall protection needs to be used. So it's something to look at your facilities. Anytime employees could get out there, think about it, do they? And then if they do, come up with a means of protecting them. Electrical panels will always be looked at. I'll just cover with this one what they look at. So 3 foot of clearance, all switch panels or breaker panels, you have to have 3 foot of clearance in front, and that's for access. So no storage there. And then everything needs to be labeled. That's what they'll do. They'll verify that. And there should be no unused openings. We see that all the time where a breaker gets taken out because they don't use that anymore, don't need it, and then a blank doesn't get replaced it. So the power's out, or something goes on, somebody comes here and they sweep their finger in there and they contact that 220 bus that's right back there. So make sure that's one thing to check at your facilities. And then everybody hires out their electrical work, right? You don't have any LMEs, any licensed electricians, okay? That's the main thing is, so don't do your own electrical work. Because then it jumps into a lot of arc flash hazards and tons of training. So it's easiest just to hire that out. With forklifts, jump into that real quick. When I did inspections, or used to, main components we look at is that there's a data plate on it, capacity plate, and it's got it right here, which should have it for, yeah, it has it for multiple multiple lifts. Are you mainly a 24-inch load center? Just standard pallet?
Yeah.
Okay. When we're talking load center, it all changes the capacity. So if you're doing a 24-inch load center, that's a standard pallet, and that's all the lifts you do. All the charts, if you got a regular original chart, have that. If you're starting to do other lifts, say with a 30 or a 40-inch load center, then that employee definitely needs additional training related to forklifts, and so he can compute what his capacity is. Because you go from 24 with a 5,000 pound, and you're out substantially further, your capacities just dive down. So you just have to do the math. And you can go online and there's a forklift capacity thing, and you can just put in the numbers. And so if you're ever doing different lifts, just do your homework on it. Forklifts can have spinner knobs. They're never supposed to be outside the wheel, so I don't think enforcement would address this one. Then also horns, you gotta have an operable horn. It can even be a squeezy one. Every forklift has to have an audible horn. And fire extinguishers are not required on them, but it's fine to have them. And always make sure that your brakes work and that your emergency brake holds on the steepest grade that you have. Again, what an inspector will do is they'll get you a trained operator running it and verify that the brakes are working. They'll take it to a steep grade, whatever you got, and make sure the emergency brakes holds. And if they're doing a thorough inspection anyway, that's what they'll do. And that the employee is a trained operator. Okay. Any questions on forklifts?
What about service records for, service requirements for forklifts?
We don't have any requirement that you have, keep those. We require you that you keep surface it and keep it in good operations. A lot of companies have policies where they check it, daily checks and all that, but we don't have the documentation requirement. It's always good to do though. Oh, one other thing I run into all the time is lifting personnel. Well, does anybody lift personnel with forklift? Do you guys?
No, we don't.
Okay. It's acceptable, but you have to have a basket that has expanded metal, or it could be plexiglass or whatever, up to 6 feet, and that's for protection from the shear point when this is going up. You got to hook it to the forks or the mast so that the basket can't slide off, and standard guardrail, and you can, you know, a lot of employers do use it. So, but don't have the, I've seen them where they're 20 feet wide. They can only actually extend 11 inches beyond the wheelbase, because if you've got a wide one, you get out here, and they don't fit.
Jim, does it have to have a backup alarm?
Nope. Only time you have to have a backup alarm is when you have an obstructed view. And then you, like on larger trucks. And a lot of people are going away with the backup alarms by using cameras. Because then it's not obstructed anymore when you have the cameras.
Tim, how do you measure that load center? Is it like if you were to?
Load center?
Yeah.
So on a standard pallet, which is 48 inches, your load center is 24.
Okay, so you just half.
Yeah, it's
distance
half.
from-
Yep, that's where your load center on a balanced load would be. And you should really know what your heaviest lift is, and then compare it to what your capacity is. Because I ran into some locations where they thought they had a heavy enough lift truck, but they really didn't. Because once your forklift and the capacity goes to the full height, that's where they can still lift that 5,000 pounds or whatever the capacity is. So it'll, if you got one that's overloaded, it'll lift it until it gets to a certain point, and then it comes over. Because your capacity actually goes down the higher you go also.
Did Garrett mention something about carbon monoxide with the propane ones?
Garnet?
Yes.
Yep.
Is there anything?
Well, when you are, the carbon monoxide poisonings that I've investigated have all been from operating propane-powered forklifts in confined areas, like if you don't have, and it's in the smaller areas. So if you're running back and forth with this one with the doors closed, it could potentially be a problem. And so those, one was at a potato storage area, and they had those plastic strippy things to keep the air movement, and that really held it in. And so I think most of them had those plastic strip things, and they were working inside, and they didn't get the ventilation going through. And one, the brother of the potato place, he went through the hyperbaric chamber up in Portland, and then they had a second employee that was affected, and they life flighted him to Portland. He went through the hyperbaric chamber twice, I believe, and so then they got an electric forklift after that. So it's a very serious thing, and especially if knowing what the symptoms are, but monitoring is good to make sure that if the alarm goes off, or if people are complaining of significant frontal headache or being extremely tired, you might think, oh, they just, they're not working like they should. Don't just say, oh, go home, because they can go home and go to sleep and not wake up. And if someone is a smoker, they already have a level of carbon monoxide in their carboxyhemoglobin in their blood, and so they already start off with like a level of 10. A level of 50 carboxyhemoglobin is lethal. The individuals at the potato place were in their 30s. So it's a very significant thing. We've had quite a few of them, a number of fatalities in Washington State, and then we've had a number in Oregon as well.
Because on this ladder, you can go to right there, and that's it. So these two, on 4-foot step ladders, people are always using the next top two steps to use. There's Werner makes them, and there are a couple different variants that make them up to a 3-foot step stool. It's not considered ladder, and they open up the exact same. Imagine this right here, down here, so it's bigger, so your whole foot can, and it's about that wide. So they're designed to be stood on top of. They're bigger, they're a little bit wider, no bars, no nothing. It's just, so if you want something that needs to get you up just a couple feet, go to something like that. So that way, like I said, you don't misuse it. The fiberglass, like I said, watch for cracks on those. And you don't have very much for tools, but I'll kind of cover other locations. Do any of you have full-blown shops with table saws, everything? Because I won't cover any of that stuff if you don't. Okay. Compressed air used for cleaning purposes, real common citation dealing with the air wand, because your compressed air is probably 100, 110 pounds set at that. They're supposed to have the safety tips, so you can't inject air under the skin, air embolism. What the safety tips do is if you deadhead it, it relieves air out the side. So it's just getting a tip on it. Or if you have a wand that you've created, you can drill a hole in it on the side, and that does the same purpose. So that's just a real common citation. It always is a serious one that enforcement cites. Other tools, like I said, you don't have a lot. Right angle grinders, always need to have the back guard. Everybody knows what a right angle grinder is. Regular grinders, most common citation item, used to be anyway, is guarding, as having a work rest adjusted to within 1/8 of an inch and a tongue guard adjusted to within 1/4 inch. Everybody know what I'm talking about on a regular grinder, pedestal grinder. And the work rest is so you don't jam something in and bust that wheel apart. And the tongue guard is on the top part and it adjusts down, and so if that wheel busts apart, it's going to hit into the tongue guard. So it's just something real common. Most employers have them. So, any questions on shop related stuff at any of your facilities? Okay. Can't think of anything else here. Oh, electrical stuff, extension cords. So, I haven't really seen very many around. Ground prongs disappear. Make sure if they do, you cut off the end, put on a new end. And when you do it, make sure you test your cords, make sure you didn't reverse the polarity and that your ground's working. So, unless you have any questions on shop related stuff, we can head on to the next area.
So with the use of the forklift in this area, this is about the same size area of the potato storage facility. So you can get a substantial amount of carbon monoxide buildup in this size of an area. So if you're really busy and loading and going back and forth, it would stay back in here because you don't have a door on the other side where you have free air flowing through. So this is one, especially back in that far corner, that would be where you would expect it to hover. And then it's worse at the top. So if you had to go up, if someone had to go up on a ladder in this area, when the forklift is operating, that would be where you'd get your maximum exposure.
As far as other stuff in storage areas like this, really the only thing we look at is your stacks and that they're orderly and not leaning. And then anytime you have areas where you go into and walk into, your aisleways need to be at least 22 inches wide. And that's about it on storage. Of course, you don't have a sprinkler system here, so you don't have to worry about heights. If you do have sprinklered areas, it's again a fire marshal code. Everything's got to be kept 18 inches below the sprinklered areas. I don't know if any of you guys have that. So.
Are there any things with like wet floors that you guys ever look at, or?
Really, it's a slipping tripping hazard. And if you do create a slip floor or come across one, you should just, put a cone out or something like that. Try to identify it. If it's an area that's always slick, because that's part of the process and you're working in there, you don't have to do anything. I mean, that's just part of the process. But if it's something out of the ordinary, like up above where we started out, definitely you need to put some kind of signage out and clean it up.